Welcome to Wilder Wolves, Hall of Fame mode fandom. My name is Wilder Adams, and we are back. We are rolling, and we are going to continue with a new guest on this show, heavily involved with the Timberwolves community. I've been a fan of this person's work for years. He's in the new wave of Timberwolves journalists, the new generation. Charlie Walton, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. We've been talking about doing an episode together for a long time, and I'm just happy that right before the season gets going, man, that we really get to push forward and just continue to see the amazing work you do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. You're doing awesome stuff over here too, so it's great to be a little part of it right now.
Yeah, Charlie, he's, like I said, I'm sure many of you follow him on Instagram, on X, and the writing he does. He's just one of those young Timberwolves journalists who are up and coming. He is growing a pretty awesome platform, and he's only going to rise from here. When I hear, people like Charlie, he's an example of who I believe are the new wave of Timberwolves journalists in our generation, in our age group. I think Charlie is near the top of that. So super honored to have him on the show. And today we have a fun episode because we were debating on exactly how this is going to be framed, but we've mutually agreed this is going to be top 10 Minnesota Timberwolves players we have ever seen in our life. And this isn't like super strict. This isn't going to be like including Kevin Garnett, including Chauncey Billups and Sam Cassell and all of those great players. I was a year old when a lot of those guys were on the team. I'll be lying if I told you guys I watched those guys with my two eyes. And Charlie, I'm sure you're on the same page on that. But so it's going to be fascinating to see how our lists come together. And before we get started with that, Charlie, I want to start by looking at the bigger picture of the Timberwolves offseason, because Minnesota, we had the quiet offseason, and now we are going into the year. I talked about it on my last episode. The team seems to be just quiet in a good way. And all the messages you get, if you see any messages on this team, is that they're working. That's like the only thing that we've seen out there. Everybody has their money. So, Charlie, my question for you is, what is your opinion on the state of the team going into the year? And part two of that, what will this offseason mean for this team's trajectory?
Yeah. I think if you look back to like 2 years ago when they made the conference finals for the first time, they had a quiet offseason before that too. They only brought in Troy Brown Jr. and Shake Milton. They proved really to be indifferent, but it's really exactly what I think like the team needed, specifically Ant. Because when you think of this is probably a year where he's going to take a leap to be maybe close to an MVP level candidate, maybe top, in that conversation. He finished 8th in the voting. And to have an offseason where you don't have to, like a day before training camp, completely readjust, that's huge for his development. And like you mentioned, it's been quiet in a good way. And last offseason was quiet too until the bombshell dropped with the Cat trade. But I'm with you. I truly do believe it's a good thing. And they were able to, I think it's credit to Tim Conley and how he really approached the offseason. I wrote an article about how he kind of makes the team feel like a family run operation. And I do believe that because he was really went right after making sure Julius Randle and Naz Reid, they stayed. He wasn't even going to entertain the possibility of them leaving. And then obviously he really doesn't do anything else. And part of the reason they had the quiet offseason was they needed to stay under the second apron, bearing the Kevin Durant deal, which had he been on the Wolves preferred list, he might have been here. They might have, traded for him, but looked like it was always going to be a quieter off season. And like you said, I really do believe that it's going to positively impact them this season.
I love how you frame just the front office and organizational, UVP, you could say, the unique value proposition of this team, because this does feel like a team that is becoming more of a tight-knit community in the right way. Because we've seen this in the past, the Minnesota Timberwolves being the complete opposite. Nobody is in Minnesota in the offseason. And, a family-ran team was pretty much thought of in the wrong context. Because, as what they say on Score North, a Glenn Taylor-ran team felt like a mama-papa shop in the worst ways.
Right.
Like kind of the old school ignorance with how to run an NBA franchise. But now we're seeing a weird balance where Tim Connolly's aggressive. He's very aggressive. He's traded for Rudy Gobert. He's been willingly able to trade Karl-Anthony Towns, yet he's maintained this ethos and continuity of this team where players still feel like they are important. Like, despite the possibility of anybody getting traded at any moment, Minnesota is doing a great job just positioning these players to believe this is home. This is where we belong, and this is where we're building. Could you talk about just that really, thin line that Tim Connolly's been able to balance on with this team?
Yeah, and I mean, he's a businessman by the nature of his trade, and with that is going to come trades like the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, and it's what he did afterwards, to go into his house, right before the trade broke, and telling him personally, "Hey, we're trading you to New York," and it's for my, I mean, it seems pretty rare to have a general or a president that's this close with the team. I mean, he dressed up like Ant for a Halloween party last year. He's a completely normal dude, and he just happens to be making millions of dollars running an NBA team, and that just it just bodes well to have a guy that has that type of mindset where it's like, yes, the shock wave moves, they're inevitable, and especially with the whole apron things, like there's going to be moves that are hard to make, and he's not going to stop making them. He's never been shy. That's part of the name of his game, but it's also in the same context. He treats players like they're human, and he makes a point to reach out to them on a human level, which is just, I mean, I think it's really essential in building a team that is a championship caliber, championship hopeful team.
And yeah, that's such a difficult thing to balance when you're an organization, because we've seen with teams like the Phoenix Suns or the Brooklyn Nets, multiple times with the Brooklyn Nets actually, but teams that get so fixated by talent, they can't build a culture from the ground up. And I think it has a lot to do with the personality of the ownership, first and foremost, a very hands-off ownership that really understands, kind of a forward-thinking way to run an organization while also maintaining old school values like having a team culture, a team identity, like the Boston Celtics, like the Los Angeles Lakers, like the Miami Heat with Heat culture, the San Antonio Spurs, of course, with their professionalism. It's a very impressive thing to me how Minnesota can be aggressive yet patient at the same time. And we don't know how that's going to work out with this team, because that's why we're here. We're going to talk about it, predict, watch, react. That's just what we're going to do as a fan base. But I just find it really impressive, and kind of spinning it back to the idea of this show, which is all about seeing the top 10 players we've seen in our life. And I'm not sure exactly when you started watching. I started watching kind of in the peak Kevin Love years with the Ricky Rubios, the Kevin Loves, prime Luke Rinauer. And we've seen a big evolution with this team.
Yeah.
And before we really get started, I want to just hear your takeaway on the team's just cultural evolution.
Yeah. Well, Ant was a big help in that, but you're right. I mean, it's night and day. And I think back to like turning points in an organization. And I think like the biggest one was obviously when Pat Bev came, like that first season, that was a huge culture shift. And I'll talk about it more later on, but like, even when like that trade deadline when D'Lo was acquired, and Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt, like, I don't know if we talk enough about, like, that was a big time in Wolves history. Like that was it might not have immediately equated to wins and more competitive basketball, but like, that it started it. It was a turning of the page type of moment, and then since then it's just been this steady build to a team that honestly is not even recognizable compared to what it used to be. I mean, you've got a new ownership group finally that's in place. You've got a head coach who has a great relationship with everybody. You've got a 1A star who's a face of the league, and a new, and Tim Connolly, who we just spoke about. So it's honestly, it's like, if you would tell a Wolves fan 20 years ago that this is all going on, or maybe not 20 years ago, but in that era, it's incredible. That's all I could say. It's cool to be a part of now and seeing it, because like you mentioned, I only started watching the Wolves really religiously in like 2015. I'm a little younger. I'm only 20. And even then it's like, I love just the game, not wins, because we weren't seeing any of them. So it's just to compare just a decade ago. And I think that's what can give fans hope for a decade from now. I mean, how many, are the Wolves going to be champions then? Like what's the team going to look like, in another decade?
It's so funny because I think we can see this happen even in our own lives. Like talking back to that trade deadline in 2020, I kind of view it like in my day job, I work a lot of inventory, and we're completely changing the inventory system at my family business right now. And it gets really choppy, it gets really ugly a little bit. And then once it flushes through and you transfer everything, then things get really efficient. And with that time, it was like the toilet was very clogged and there were just weird spots. The bathroom smelled bad and nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to clean the toilet seat, nothing. It was nasty, but you have to even if the bathroom stinks another 10 minutes. And that's what before the ownership came, before Anthony Edwards came into his own, that was a really key time. And I think we have to appreciate where the team is at right now, even though they haven't reached the destination that we want. I mean, we haven't gotten the mansion and the generational wealth yet, but this team was literally living in the gutters.
I know. Yeah.
5 years ago. They've gone really far to being a fairly well-respected organization now. So,
well, they're knocking on the door of that mansion. They've done it 2 straight years, and that's really what Tim Conley was talking about in his exit interview, is just being a team that's consistently in the mix. Like, that's a good thing. And I mean, it's hard to be a conference finals team back-to-back seasons.
It's hard.
Yeah. So for the Wolves to be that type of team is, like I said, just pretty incredible.
The only team in the Western Conference since 2019 to do that, by the way. Minnesota keeps knocking at the door, negotiating to buy that mansion, and another team just beats them to the house first. And that happens sometimes, but maybe someday the house market goes into their favor. But now let's get really started with the show, because I think this top 10 ranking of the best Timberwolves we've ever seen in our lifetime, for me, it was 2011. When did you start really watching the Timberwolves?
Yeah, like 2015, Cat's rookie year is really when I started. Like I was, a fan before that, but when I really started religiously watching the team was about, watching Gorgie Jang and have him become my favorite player. That era. So,
Gorgie Goat, shout out Gorgie Jang. Let's get started with our top 10 ranking for the best Timberwolves. We're going to start from 10 to 1. And reminder, everybody, this is kind of a blank canvas. Like, the way I'm going about this is literally the best players I've seen in a Timberwolves uniform rather than legacy, because if that was the case, I would have like Kevin Garnett and those guys on the list, but that's not what this list is for me. Charlie, his definition might be a little different, but he'll start from 10 and I'll give 10 and we'll move all the way to number 1. So Charlie, let's start with 10.
Yeah, all right. To kick things off, a guy who I just mentioned, I would include in any top whatever Wolves ranking by default. Gorgie, 4th in franchise history in rebounds, 3rd in blocks, 9th in field goal percentage. No one's looking at his stats with the Wolves when they look back on his time. It's 6 seasons here. It's was a humanitarian off the court. I mean, he was really a player, and this is personal, I guess, more so a personal inclusion for me, but it's like really helped me fall in love with basketball. And I was able to meet him a couple times, just super nice guy. And now he's working with the Spurs. And it was funny when he retired and he reached out to San Antonio to, he wanted to join their front office, and he reached out and he's like, can I just join as an unpaid intern and learn, the ropes and be with the team, be with the players? And they're like, we will totally bring you on board. We love you, but we're going to pay you. We're not going to bring you in as an unpaid intern. So I think that little move, obviously money wasn't the objective for a guy who's been in the NBA as long as he was, but still, it just goes to show, I think it's a good example of his character.
If we were ranking this based on best guys in a Timberwolves uniform, he would have a very strong case for number 1.
Yeah. Yep.
One, he's a great human being. I've been fortunate enough to meet with Gorgie, and he's one of those people who just gives people time, and those little things matter. And of course, he does big things with the financial investments he's put into his home country in Senegal. So he's doing great things on and off the court. And like you said, he was a really good rebounder. He kind of helped the trend. Like, he can sort of space the floor a little bit.
Yeah.
He had
Trebuchet.
He was kind of a weird blend of the old, because he was big. He wasn't that fast, but started to add some modern skill, right? Very much a 2010s forward. Yeah. So, I mean, Gorgie at 10, I can't hate on that, because Gorgie's maybe not part of the final chapter of where this franchise was, but he was definitely a bright spot when things were darkest. And I think that deserves a lot of credit and a lot of legacy respect. And I'll start with number 10, because I was less soulful than you, unfortunately. So I just went on, okay, here are the 10 best players I've seen in a Wolves uniform. And I'll start with, should I start with a few honorable mentions? Or
Yeah,
not?
you do that, and then I got a couple too. So you give your honorable mentions, and I got a couple too.
Okay, I just want to say I think this player could easily end up on this list. My first honorable mention is Naz Reid.
Wow.
Reid.
Okay, yep.
I think Naz Reid's getting there once his offensive consistency gets a little better.
Right.
We need to see more rebounding, more defense from Naz on a consistent basis. But the offensive ceiling, in my opinion, is a 20-point NBA player if he puts it all together. And he also has the athleticism to be like this jumbo, like two-way weird wing big if he wants to be. And it'll be a question of if he gets there. But he's an honorable mention. Ricky Rubio.
Yep.
Rubio. Of course, another fan icon in the community. I mean, Jeff Teague, Zach LaVine, not a star yet in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And then Nikola Pekovic, of course, although he's had some weird off-the-court issues.
Yeah.
Just to put that out there. But my number 10 Timberwolf I've ever seen with my two eyes, it's not my favorite or least favorite, just best I've seen with my two eyes. I had D'Angelo Russell, number 10.
I like that.
Flawed player. Nobody doubts that. Went from a max player to signing a 2-year, $12 million contract. And no disrespect to D'Angelo Russell, that happened for a reason. Because he hasn't had a true identity in the NBA. He wants to be a star, not quite good enough to be a star, has been quite scalable. I think Dallas is a great opportunity for him to scale his talents and be a really high-level six-man, which I think is his calling in the NBA. But in his peak for Minnesota, he did drop 30 in a play-in game. He did average nearly 20 points per game in Minnesota. He was that number 2/number 3 scorer when the team really started to rise up. He is a part of that story that D'Angelo Russell was the starting point guard and the third best player on a team that made the playoffs again after the Jimmy Butler era. So I think he deserves respect in the top 10. Very talented player, wasn't fully realized. Honestly, should have ended up top 7 on this list if he reached his potential, but he's still talented enough to be in the top 10.
Yeah, I'm with you. I got him on my list too, so I will hold off on my comments, but I totally agree with everything you said, though, for sure.
Number 9 for you.
Yeah, my number 9, I've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I think like if you want to shrink it down, just last season alone, take all the context out of it. He was the most consistent player on a team that eventually went to the conference finals. No. And that was a guy who just not that many years ago, who knew what his role was in the NBA. And, obviously he was able to put his career kind of on a pedestal with the Wolves. He did too good because they couldn't keep him. And he, signed that deal in Atlanta. Good for him. But while he was here, just the ultimate Iron Man. I mean, I can't believe the stat. He played in 223 of 224 total games while he was with the team. 82 of 82 last year, 82 of 82 the year before, all the playoff games. And the only game he missed was a DMP right when he got here. Like I think might have been the first game after they traded for him. And ever since, he's just been, he had that breakout against the Kings early on. Every time he takes the court, he's taking the toughest perimeter matchup. He's shooting 40% from 3 on the other end. And it's just the impact on winning is why I have him in this ranking more so than anything. Gorgie, it was more of a sentimental pick, I suppose, but this just was he was really essential in what the Wolves did these last couple of years. And he's going to do great in Atlanta. I'm really bummed out that he's gone. He's like one of the smartest basketball players I've ever heard talk about the game. Like he just knows the game. If he wants to be a coach or a mentor or anything, he will be able to do it. So that's probably the thing I'll miss the most with Nah. But yeah, for sure, I had to get him in this list.
I totally agree that he's built to be a mentor, a coach of some sort, because a lot of good coaches, it isn't because they're always the star on the team and everything is easy and they get the money. Nickeil comes into the NBA. He's looking like he might be a star with the way he looks in Summer League and in the preseason. His brother, Shea, he did have a lot of talent. Didn't work out quite that way, but is able to rediscover himself as a high IQ two-way player worthy of a $16 million a year contract. And I think it takes a lot of knowledge and intelligence to really reshape your game of that nature. And also just the humility he had on the team. I totally agree with that. And while I didn't have him top 10, So much respect for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And at number 9 for me, I'm going to go a different point guard, and that is Mike Conley.
Mike Conley, yep, right on.
Mike Conley made the top 10, and that 24 or 23 to 24 season is what really sealed it for me. That season when he was the starting point guard on a team that made the conference finals, and that was a team, even to a bigger extent, it lacked point guards that play so much, and Mike Conley's presence on the basketball court on the offensive end was so critical. They were not a good offense when Mike Conley was off the floor. They were 5.4 points better, 100 possessions per 100 possessions with Mike Conley on the basketball court that year offensively. And he shot 63 shooting, 45% from three. He didn't throw over the ball. Insane efficiency, took care of the basketball, made shots. Just he woke Rudy Gobert up and made him an asset on offense that second year. And that really saved Rudy Gobert's image on the trade to Minnesota too. And he's been just a bridge for Anthony Edwards, for Jaden, these young players, a mentor they can lean on. Nickeil Alexander-Walker talked about how critical Mike Conley was for him as well. He's just, I think he is going to be in this Timberwolves story, just somebody who really, we talk about D'Angelo Russell pushing this team forward a little bit. Mike Conley propelled this team even further forward in this team's character development, number one, and his efficiency. And even though he's not the same player right now, what he brings on the basketball court makes him somebody you can't take off the floor 48 minutes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he's been a little bit too important to what the Wolves have been doing. You know, so I'm with you. I also have him on the list. I think we're going to be different in just that. Like, I'm assuming you've got guys who are before my time of watching the team. So like that's why I've got D'Lo. We'll talk about it quite a bit higher, but
don't spoil it.
I'm not spoiling it. D'Lo may or may not be number one. Just kidding. He's not. My 8th is Naz Reid. And I totally agree with, he's maybe not quite there in terms of the consistency, and he's still relatively young, but I just look at it like when he came out of LSU undrafted, looked like a completely different person than he is right now. He had to completely reform his body. One of the best success stories. He won 6th Man of the Year 2 years ago. And then last year he had a better statistical season in most ways. And you know, he genuinely appreciates the fan base here. And, you know, that means something. I think that means something because he signed that long-term, you know, longish term deal this offseason. That was part of it. You know, and it's, I know he recognizes the Wolves as the team that really gave him the chance out of LSU. And he's really just embraced the state. He's embraced everything. And the thing with him too, is he had to battle adversity on the court. Like when you think of when the Wolves traded for Gobert, he was DMP'd a couple times early on in that season, which is kind of crazy to think about when you look at, like, he just signed a huge contract this offseason. He's essential to the Wolves' success next to Anthony Edwards going forward. So, yeah, I think I'm with you in that. Maybe it's a little high to put him on this list. He still has holes to patch in his game. Defensively, I think, is a huge, you know, area for him to just continue to become more consistent in. But I think he will certainly climb this, or at least my ranking, as the years go on.
Absolutely. Naz Reid, I mean, he's maybe number 11 on my list, but he's number 1 in my heart. So I think he's going to get into this top 10. I'm actually hopeful and confident he's got another gear in his game. He's such a unique talent. He's 6'10". He's fluid. He's got a handle. He's got a strap of a jumper. He's got feel. I mean, his potential is incredibly high. And I'm very curious to see what he does this year. And I'm going to have a number 8, and he is not everybody's favorite because he is a part of the dark times in the Timberwolves era. At number 8, I have Andrew Wiggins.
Ooh, all right.
And
all right.
I think there's two sides to this story. Andrew Wiggins is a heartbreaking story in Timberwolves history because when they traded for him in the Kevin Love deal, he was viewed kind of like how Cooper Flagg is viewed right now, as a transformational, transcendent number 1 pick who can become what Anthony Edwards has become for Minnesota. That was the hope when they traded for him. And he just lacked the intensity. He just lacked that thing that you need to be a great player. Seems like a nice guy off the court. but on the court, he just lacked that little crazy mind, little trigger that some of these stars have in their head. And that really held him back. And I mean, there's been stuff like even on Jeff Teague's podcast, I believe, where they were like, yeah, he played. And he was like, yep, I get my money. I don't, that matters most to me. And of course, you get paid a lot. I'm not going to hate on getting your money. But it wasn't about being a great NBA player, and that held him back to a major extent. But he is 4th all time in scoring for Minnesota. He is still a ridiculous talent who at his peak was dropping 24 a game on this roster. He's still somebody when he was young in 2017 was one of the most electrifying young players in the league, being able to dunk on anybody. He can create his own shot. He had a handful of notable 40-point games. He was an incredible talent, and he's talented enough to be on this list. But of course, he should be honestly top 3 on this list with how talented he was.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. I definitely have him higher just based on my my criteria. But my number 7, I've got D'Angelo Russell, so not too far off from where you had him. I did struggle finding a spot for him. I wanted him in the top 10 or in my top 10. I didn't want to go any higher than 7th. It just comes back to I think the last 7 months, 8 months of him in a Wolves uniform, including that offseason, where he had a disappointing playoff series against Memphis, where Chris Finch replaced him with Jordan McLaughlin. He played well in that play-in game, but that series left a lot to be desired overall. And then they come back. The Wolves trade for Rudy Gobert, and if you look at D'Lo's career arc, he's always had a lob catching big next to him. In Brooklyn, it was Jared Allen. In Golden State, you could say it was Willie Cauley-Stein. And then he comes to Minnesota, it's Cat. He's not a rim running big. And then they get Gobert. And I was thinking, as were a lot of people, this is going to be a really good partnership. And they just never got on the same page. And it was really detrimental to D'Lo's fit with the team. I mean, it's not the reason why he was traded. Obviously, money was a big reason why. But for all of those things, he still was here for 3.5 years. And like I mentioned earlier, that day, that trade deadline in 2020 was a really big turning point. And D'Lo was the headliner of that. And he averaged, nearly 20 points when he was here. Offensively, he's a great talent. I agree with everything you said earlier. So yeah, it's just, it's the end was unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that end really does hold a lot of weight, at least in my mind, with, how good he is in Wolves history.
I think the biggest sign of how historically horrid this franchise is the fact we're ranking the top 10 players and we're at 7 and we're talking about how disappointing they are.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the heartbreaking part with this team. But you know what? It's steps at a time. And even that team was so weird because I think one thing I'm learning in the NBA world is alignment is so critical culturally. And it's not a coincidence that Minnesota's second year with Cat and Rudy worked when more people had financial stability and they had an extra year together. People liked each other in the locker room. It wasn't a talent issue that year one. But D'Angelo Russell wants to get paid. Rudy Gobert comes on the team. Deep down, he knows that means I'm not getting paid here. And then people are talking about D'Angelo Russell making fun of Rudy, making fun of his hands, all of these things. You can speculate the motivation, but on a human part, you see somebody who takes your money and you're seeing evident flaws like that, that's going to create chaos. And it did. Mm-hmm. So it just, this team, there was a point where this ship was going to sink with D'Angelo Russell, and that was the point of it. And now to my number 7 player, and I'm not sure where you have this player. I have no clue. But the player I have on 7 is Jaden McDaniels.
Jade? All right. He was one of my honorable mentions.
I love Jaden McDaniels, and I don't think I hide that on social media for the past few years. I have not hidden my admiration, my appreciation, and my just hope and optimism for him in the future. And Jaden is an interesting one because this might be slight projection, even if I didn't think about it when making this list. But Jaden McDaniels is one of the most talented defenders in basketball. He is the sidekick to Anthony Edwards in this new iteration that really, we talk about one of the best young cores in the league, and Minnesota's up there now. And Jaden McDaniels is a big reason for that. And he's been with this team from the very beginning. Like, it's only been Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and Naz Reid in this process, who's been with this team in this entire new iteration. And outside of Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels is the only one with an actual NBA accolade. And I think that is critical. I think offensively, he's a better player than he's been allowed to show, mainly because it hasn't been a situation where he's been able to play to his strengths, which is partially his fault because he hasn't become a consistent shooter yet, a consistent off-ball cutter. But the talent is there. He can be productive. He's had great playoff series. He's a good shooter in the playoffs, oddly enough. Got over 40% in 24 and 25. He shot 38% from three. He had the 30-point game against the Lakers. He had multiple 20-point per games against the Thunder. Super consistent round two. Jaden McDaniels is just, I think, a very underrated player, a super talented player. And I think there's another leap there. The question is if he gets to that level.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The reason I didn't have him on the list is like, I just think back, I think back to last season, and I was really critical of Jaden early in the year. I thought he was really an offensive liability. He couldn't make an open three, and it's detrimental. It was detrimental to Ant's success. We saw it. Other people were pointing it out. Jim Pete was pointing it out on the broadcast. Like, the defense was shifting to the side of the floor that Ant was on. Jaden was wide open. They didn't have to guard him. It was a Josh Okogie situation.
Yeah.
And it was, and I wrote an article, and I was wrong in saying that. I'm like, I think Jay needs to become a 40% 3-point shooter for him to be productive next to Ant. Obviously, I didn't expect Chris Finch to completely flip how he uses him. Be like, hey, we're gonna put the ball in your hand, and we want you to attack the rim. That's where, obviously proven, that's where he's at his best. I just didn't have him in my top 10 because, like you mentioned, I think it's still a lot of like the future with Jaden, and I'm really high on him. I think after last year, how he finished, he's a key part of the Wolves going forward. He was early in the season too, and that's why I was so critical of him. Because it's like, not even anything about the money. It's just you're going to be here for a long, long time, hopefully, and you were not a good partnership with your, like you said, your hopefully co-star eventually, maybe, in Anthony Edwards. But I totally see why you have him, on the list at 7.
And another part of it was that, like, the players I mentioned, it was almost like productive, but sort of empty. Like Mike Conley, no, he was super productive and super efficient, but I think there's a talent gap between Conley at this point of his career and what Jaden McDaniels can bring to you at his best. So I also considered the fact that Jaden McDaniels has winning skills already at this age. And I know I'm kind of articulating it like it's projection based again, but McDaniels has winning traits that have helped him get to this level, unlike some of those players behind him. Like, I think he's got more to contribute to winning than a D'Angelo Russell does, or when Andrew Wiggins was on this team. Wiggins turned into that player in Golden State, but with Minnesota. So, yeah, who's your number 6?
Yeah. I've got Malik Beasley, and again, it's another guy who I struggled to have.
Malik Beasley.
I've got Beasley top 6, and I'm thinking back to like this list. A lot of it has to do with how they impacted winning, right? That means a lot to in perspective with what the team is trying to do right now, which is win. But when Beasley was here, his best years, when he averaged 20 points, 21 points, whatever, the Wolves were good. But he was really consistent, and he was a really good player for the couple of years that he was here. And I mean, his skills obviously opened up and allowed the Wolves to acquire Gobert, which maybe isn't so much a reason to have him at number 6, but just he was a success story. The Wolves got him as a prospect essentially from the Nuggets, and came out like gangbusters, shot the leather off the ball against the Clippers in his first game, and that's who he was really until the end in Minnesota. So I knew I wanted to have Beasley 6. Yeah, I like him at 6 for what he did for the years he was here.
Wow, I think if we projected Malik Beasley on this list and we had the number at over under 6.5, I don't even think Malik Beasley would have picked over 6.5. So
yeah,
that is bold, and I appreciate it. And he is one of the best shooters in the NBA. And it's
when he's on the court. Let's hope everything off the court. He's got some.
It's all chaos with him. That's where I disagree with him. Top 10. It's all chaos with him. even in Minnesota, he's getting suspended. He's having weed cases. He's pointing guns at neighbors. There's always been something wrong. And when the team made the playoffs, I don't believe he was that impactful anymore. Like, wasn't a consistent starter, wasn't great in the playoffs. So that would be my respectful rebuttal with Beasley 6.
Yeah.
But that year in 2021, like you mentioned, was ridiculous as a shooter, was giving you 19 points per game. And he has that talent, and we saw that in Detroit.
Yeah.
So
again, really, I might be placing too much stock in, like, again, that turning point. Beasley was part of that wave of new players that came in to turn things around. But I completely agree with you. The off-court stuff was inexcusable for a guy. I mean, yeah, it's. You're probably right in that. I'm a little too bullish on him, but I do think he was, when he was on the court, a very, very good player. So, but there's an asterisk there, and
yeah, no worries. You're always going to be someone who bets on Malik Beasley, and I know he in particular would appreciate that. So now let's look at 6 for me. And number 6, I have a new Timberwolf who earned the fans' hearts late in the season, not early in the season, and that is Julius Randle. And Julius Randle, man, I mean, if you think about it, of course, everybody's wondering, like, is this kind of a little fling? Is he going to be gone? Is this short term? And then he proves himself in the second half of the year. Like, personally, I'm going to make fun of myself right now. I basically insinuated he was the cancer on the team last year, earlier in the year. I said, sometimes you put one personality in a room, it can ruin the entire cultural dynamic. And that philosophy is true, but I put that on Julius Randle for why the team didn't work, rather than being patient with him. And he proved me wrong. He proved many wrong. He became that playmaking hybrid forward who can still be a second option, had a really good playoff run until OKC. And he's an all-NBA player. He's an all-star. And I still believe he's a top 40-ish player in the NBA and probably the second best player on the team right now. So Randle is still an incredible talent. And I'm actually really curious to see what year 2 looks like for him, because now he's confident. He's got his money. And he's got chemistry. He knows what his role is. Like, he's another player, if you're optimistic about Minnesota being super good because of the potential for alignment this year, Julius Randle is in the front of that conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. He was one of my honorable mentions. He's my other honorable mention. And I think I was also too. I mean, it was hard not to be very critical of Randle early in the season. Like, it was driving me nuts the amount of times he was just getting back cut on defense with no type of, like, energy on that side of the ball. And looking back on it, like, not that this is an excuse, but during that time to have to get used to a new ecosystem, a new team, a new co-star, all on the fly, and then also move your family to a new city. Like, that was right before, or I don't even know. I mean, school might have already started for his kids. Like, it's a big change. And that's not to write off how he played early in the year, but how he finished. I'm with you. It was incredible. He led them to that 17-4 finish. He was insanely good against LeBron and the Lakers. He was really good against the Warriors. And then they all hit the wall. That was OKC, and Randle didn't play well. The whole team didn't play well. And that's not an indictment on him. The reason I didn't have him in my top 10 is really that it's just, he only had, like, and I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm being really critical of what he did to the end of last season was incredible, but it was only half a season. And, you look like a guy like Beasley and off the court, whatever, but he was here for longer. And that's part of where I'm making this ranking, is just longevity, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, after this season, I expect big things from him. I really do think he's going to play well, and it's important that he does for Ant's sake. He will certainly be on my top 10 list by the end of the season if that happens.
Yeah, he has a big opportunity ahead of him. And, like I said, like, this list, it's our own. There's no right or wrong answer necessarily, because it's just what we decided, how we wanted to paint this picture for this. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I could only imagine, like, following up to what you said, I moved my dog to Minnesota this year, and that was hard on me.
Yeah, right.
Could only imagine what it's like for Julius Randle moving an entire family in days. And that goes for Dante DiVincenzo with his young family as well. That can't be easy. So I think he's going to have a really good year. And Charlie, let's do number 5.
Yeah. So in my top 5, I've got Mike Conley. Again, it's going back to that impact on winning. And he's been here for 2.5 years. when he replaced D'Lo toward the end of that season, and then obviously into the next season, we realized how important it was for the Wolves' sake to have a point guard like Mike Conley on the team, a point guard who had that steady hand, who was that presence in the locker room, more so than D'Lo. He's just not the same player that D'Lo was, and he's just been instrumental in what the Wolves have done, both on the court. He's, like I mentioned, too important to what they're doing. I think, there's been times where you need to start scaling back, but Chris Finch hasn't been able to do that because he's been so important at times. But then off the court too, he's been equally as instrumental in Ant's growth. He unlocked Rudy Gobert, like you mentioned. All of it, I think, constituted him to be in my top 5 over the last decade. It's,
We talked about him earlier in the show. Such an instrumental influence on this team with that leadership, with that efficiency, with what he can bring as a shooter, with his experience. He's going to be one of the greatest just transition players in Timberwolves history, because he was somebody who helped the team transition from being a kid to a man.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, just incredibly valuable. And Charlie, number 5 on my list, okay? Might sound low because I started watching early. Like, I didn't watch like 80 games a year in 2011, but I did start watching, just watching, buying jerseys, watching the games.
Yeah.
I had Kevin Love, number 5.
Kevin Love, number 5. Yeah. See, so he's not even on my list because I wasn't, like, 2015, he wasn't on the team. That was when Wiggs was here. So totally, I think that's reasonable for Kevin Love.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. He's not hating on Kevin Love. He's not saying Malik Beasley's better than Kevin Love.
Yeah, right.
Not saying that. It's when he watched versus when I started watching. But Kevin Love and his peak is giving you 26 and 12.5. One of the best rebounders in the league. One of the best shooters. He was a star on an NBA championship team right after he gets, traded from Minnesota. So he was an incredible player, and he could even be higher on this list depending on what you value on legacy, or you can argue he's ahead of 2 players on this list based on how I went about this list. But incredible player, kind of cat before cat in a lot of ways, just super versatile, modern big. He provided a physicality that Cat didn't quite bring. Not quite as skilled as Cat, but similar archetype. Just a super awesome player.
Yeah. So my number 4, much higher than you had him. I've got Andrew Wiggins, and he was here when the Wolves were bad, and I totally agree with you that he is in a way kind of heartbreaking in that he never blossomed into becoming that Anthony Edwards type of player. Still won Rookie of the Year, still gave you 20 points a night. He was available pretty consistently. But the thing with the number one option too is, like, it's really hard to find a player like Ant. Like, in the draft is all educated guessing, right? You can strike out easier than you can hit a line drive to center field.
Yes.
And I don't think that should be too big of a knock on Wiggins in that that's not personally who he was. Like you said, he didn't have that it factor. And was catastrophic to who he was supposed to become. That ultimately did hold him back quite a bit. We saw when he went to Golden State, he's at his best when he's a 3rd or 4th option around really good talent. When he was with the Wolves, he didn't have good talent around him aside from, Karl-Anthony Towns. And, I'll mention Cat more, regarding this, but it's like, wasn't a competitive team around him. The Wolves really weren't, like, what was happening around Wiggins and Towns, but Wiggins specifically, wasn't a winning environment. Winning players, coaches, the whole thing. So I don't want that to hold Wiggins too far back on my list. Again, only in the perspective of 2015 and earlier. So.
No, absolutely. And with Andrew Wiggins, that is a great point to mention because, some people are born with that thing, and I don't think he was born with that it factor. However, you put him in an environment with, structure, stability, consistency, which is the furthest from what he had in Minnesota. Maybe he becomes an excellent number 2. Some people are not meant to be the CEO. Some people are meant to be a killer assistant or a killer executive. And that brings value, but maybe just not a number 1. And I don't think he was, but maybe he would have been a max player with the right just infrastructure, which he wasn't given. And number 4 for me, and this might sound low to people, and I am saying this with love. I'm saying this with pure love. Number 4, I have Karl-Anthony Towns.
All right.
And It's based on what this list is for me. The best I've seen with my two eyes. And Cat was, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is one of those players is so unbelievably gifted that his floor was a high-level starter and his ceiling was probably a top 5 player. Just a very safe range, which is why he was the clear-cut number 1 pick. I mean, 7-footer, one of the best shooters in the world, has all of this skill, has feel offensively, had all the tools to be like a more athletic Dirk if he wanted to be. That was the type of talent he had. And unfortunately, some of the things that held him back were on the defensive end. And sometimes, while it's not his fault that the team had the infrastructure it had, he wasn't going to be like a Peyton Manning on the Colts and just drag you out of it either. And I think both can be true. So Cat was a great player, probably hit like the 80th percentile of what he could have been, which is a good result. A little more meat on the bone, I think, with what Cat could have been if he figured out the defense a little more, figured out the leadership thing on a more consistent basis. Great human being, and none of us will ever deny that. But just on this list context, he's number 4.
Totally fair. Totally fair. All right. My number 3, Rudy Gobert. We all know the book on how the Wolves went about getting him. They paid a premium. He was bad his first year. And then he comes back and he anchors the best defensive team in the NBA and he wins his 4th defensive player of the year. Last season, he wasn't quite as impactful, but he was, at least statistically, but he was still that force that, like, if the Wolves didn't have him out there consistently, you would feel it. They would have felt the lack of rebound. The defense was still there, even though he wasn't getting the tangible results. I mean, having him, just the name, having Rudy Gobert on the paint, like it means something. And it meant something last season too. So I think moving forward, the question for him with me is just how far can the Wolves go with him on the roster? Can they truly be a championship level team with Gobert at the 5 spot? And I wrote about that. And I mean, it's not an easy question to answer. And does it come down to the fact of, like, he's a situational player? And if the Wolves get matchups that favor Gobert, he might lead them to a championship, or at least to the finals. To me, it's tough to have any of your starters be truly situational. And I'm not sure Gobert is exclusively situational, but I had the thought of, like, to counteract that situationality, if you want to call it that. He was working with Lethal Shooter in the offseason on, like, mid-range shots around the free throw line and floaters. And I wrote about that. It's like, if he can just add, like, just a somewhat like a threat of a floater, not a mid-range shot, not anything outlandish, in my opinion, that would make him a lot more dynamic. And the question then for that comes down to whether you think that's at all reasonable to ask a guy in his 30s who's never done that to start doing that. He practices them a lot, like before games. He's always working on his push shot, which I don't know how much water that holds in terms of him being able to do it in a game. But I think I look at, like, Isaiah Hartenstein. He's a guy, he doesn't shoot threes, very dynamic center. We saw that in the conference finals. And Gobert, when he's working out of the short roll, when he sets a high pick and roll for Ant, they send 2 to Ant every time, because Gobert is not a threat in the short roll. Adding a floater would just, like, the defense would just have to be there a little closer, and then you get back cuts, and then things open up. Maybe I'm probably going way too deep into this, and again, this might not be at all reasonable, but I think just moving forward, if he can do that, that would really help the Wolves out. But overall, looking back on it, he is constant. He won a DPOY. He's done it, or his 4th DPOY, and he's done it all in his 30s on a new team. So I feel confident with him as my number 3.
I'll piggyback you on this because he's also number 3 for me.
Nice.
And yes, I had him ahead of Karl-Anthony Towns. And of course, like you said, ideally he has a little more in his toolbox offensively. I think number 1, it starts with catching the basketball, because we've even seen flashes of a push shot, once in a blue moon with Rudy Gobert.
Right.
For me, it's more about, like, can you give him the ball consistently to get that shot up there? That's probably the difference. But hey, if he adds a Game 7 Denver Nuggets fadeaway jumper,
he might win MVP.
So Rudy Gobert, you got another gear, my friend. But in seriousness, this was a player, of course, highly controversial when they traded for him. The value they traded for him for, even though I think it was people getting confused with, 6 dimes being $6 type of thing, right? I think that's a lot of the players are overvalued. The draft picks were overvalued, but he did underwhelm year 1. Year 2, that is one of the greatest peaks I've ever seen in a Timberwolves uniform, because that was a number 1 defense spearheaded by DPOY level play from Rudy. And he found some life offensively too, even though the offense that year was disappointing. They were like 17th in offensive rating. He still went back to near 15 points, top 5 in the league in rebounds, defensive player of the year. They don't get there without Rudy Gobert, because without Rudy Gobert, they're not the best defense in the league. And I had to put him above Cat, because the best of what we've seen this team be is with him being a more important player than Cat on this roster. There's a reason why Minnesota more than held their own when Cat got hurt that year with Naz Reid starting, and they still kept winning games because he was the second most valuable player on that team. So shout out Rudy Gobert.
That's a really fair point. That's really really smart. I've got my number 2 of Karl-Anthony Towns, and the fan in my heart hurts hearing Cat at number 4.
I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry.
My boss at Zone Coverage, Tom Schreier, he always calls me a cat bobo. That's what he always calls me. And I, I try not to be biased when I think of, and when I would be, covering him in a way. But he was like Gorgie, a guy who helped me fall in love with basketball. And I met him a couple times, like you mentioned, a really nice individual, very, very great human being. But focusing on the basketball stuff, he's here for 9 years and insanely talented, like you mentioned, really unique skill set to be in a near 7-foot frame. And I guess I'm following the trend of me going back to certain moments, and I think back to Gobert's first year here, and Chris Finch has gave Towns a lot of praise for essentially completely altering his game to fit next to Gobert. And they had a really good connection kind of from the start, and it just continued to blossom. Mm-hmm. And without Cat's willingness to adapt, that doesn't happen. I don't think they even make like that. It's maybe a little bit like a D'Lo Gobert thing, right? Like Cat was really willing to make it work, and he was willing to essentially play a different position. Although he had played next to like Vanderbilt, Taj Gibson, guys who were natural centers, but still, that was a big point, I think, in Cat's career, especially being that it was when the Wolves were competitive. Very loyal to the state of Minnesota. Did great things off the court with his coat drives. So on the court, I think the stats and stuff speak for themselves. Multi-time All-Star, won the 3-point contest, and then some may call his stats here with the Wolves empty in that they weren't competitive. But again, like I mentioned with Wiggins, the Wolves weren't competitive around Cat. They were they were doing nothing to elevate him to elevate the team, really. And John Krasinski said it best. He said, I'm paraphrasing, Towns was a product of his environment, which was an environment defined by instability.
Yes.
Coaches in and out, players in and out. There was just not a winning, atmosphere with the Wolves. And you're right. He wasn't going to be a Peyton Manning, and he wasn't going to be that guy, which you would have loved to have as a number 1 overall pick. Mm-hmm. He wasn't. And again, that to me, doesn't hold too much, just because it's not really, there's nothing. I mean, that's just who he was as a player. So yeah, Karl, I totally agree with your reasoning for putting him below Gobert, but I've got him number 2.
I think you made Cat's case perfect. Like, you articulated it excellently, because he's just so likable, such a good human being. And he was one of those rare players who put a Minnesota cape on his back. He embraced Minnesota. He loved Minnesota. He was with this team when it was up, it was down. And who knows what this team would have been if they gave him the infrastructure that they gave Anthony Edwards. Maybe he ends up being a Kevin Durant level player. Who knows? Karl-Anthony Towns is an excellent talent and an excellent person. And I don't want people to hear me say like he doesn't have the number 1 personality to like defame his character. That's not, he was an excellent human being. He was such a good just voice to have next to Anthony Edwards. I don't think there was a better person to be next to Anthony Edwards as Ant ascended, because Cat was good enough to let Anthony Edwards go at his own pace. But also, once Anthony Edwards hit his stride, Cat wasn't going in his way. And that is such a unique dynamic And I think something that we need to really talk about in the Anthony Edwards story, how important Karl-Anthony Towns was for that path. So Cat, in my opinion, is one of the 3 greatest Timberwolves ever. Just pure greatness. He's top 3 easily. So
yeah, I got one more thing on Cat really quick. I think like it's important to mention too, like you mentioned earlier, it's all about when things happen in the NBA and when windows open, when doors open, when opportunities open up. Like let's say, for example, Cat gets drafted in 2020 and he is on this team as it develops. We might be having a completely different conversation about him.
Totally.
He might have been in, he might be at Ant's level right now. It's just he was drafted when the Wolves in the middle of a really dark time, and I do think, like you mentioned earlier, it's important to mention that part of the game.
And not to make this list even more sour, but I'm going to name my number 2 player right now. And my number 2 player that I've ever seen in my life in a Timberwolves uniform, Jimmy Butler.
Oh, dude.
I'm sorry. It's the definition of the list, the best I've seen.
Yep.
And Jimmy Butler that year, despite me believing he was maybe the worst thing to ever happen to Karl-Anthony Towns in his career, ruining the guy's reputation. I thought the way he operated on this team was entirely classless that last year. I get it. It was money. It wasn't necessarily meant to be personal, but he made it personal. He made it personal with Cat. He made it personal with that front office. He let his ego get in the way of this team in many fronts. He could have demanded a trade much more gracefully. He could have done so without defaming a guy's character like he did with Karl-Anthony Towns. And it took Cat years to really overcome the labels and the narratives that Jimmy Butler was the driver of putting on his name. So I'm going to just, before I say the good about Jimmy Butler, I'll be entirely truthful, entirely honest, and not let the stain he left on this franchise go under the rug. So I just wanted to put that out there. But he did that year. He started slow that year. He became a borderline top 10 player that season. When he was healthy, Minnesota is a top 3 seed. And when he wasn't healthy, they fell to the 8th seed. He comes back from the meniscus injury, clearly not the same in that playoffs against Houston. And there's something we have to admire about Jimmy Butler that way, that there was a toughness and a grit to him, even though it had bad sides that we saw in the worst ways, driven by the politics of the team, which was simply bad ownership by Glenn Taylor, by the way, per usual, because they traded for a guy that they didn't want to pay a max. Like, that's what they did, which is pure idiocy, entirely irresponsible. But that's what happened. And he was still a great player. He's still the second best player I've ever seen on this team. And he had a versatility. Even though it didn't show its best light in Minnesota, there is a leadership to him, which is why he does make multiple NBA Finals appearances, why he's going to make the Hall of Fame more likely than not. He's a fantastic player. And outside of the guy we're both going to mention, the best I've seen on this team. And I didn't put my emotion into it. I just had to say it. He's the second best player I've seen on this team. Really great player.
Yeah, and I think we're a little bit similar in like how we justified, like you justified Butler, I justified Beasley, and there's stuff that came with them that maybe could bring them down on certain people's lists. Like I didn't have him on my list, but I think mine is more centered around there's like an off the court. I don't know, because Beasley is the exception to that with my list, but totally agree. I mean, he was awesome when he was here. He was great. There's nothing you could say when he played. And also too, toward the end of his career or toward the end of his time with the Wolves, like obviously this is who he is. He demands out when he's ready to go. It's his way or the high, like he's going to force out ugly. It's businessman. Yep. It's just, that's how he's going to do it. We know that, the Warriors knew that when they traded for him. It was also, I think, partly on like the Wolves. There's no reason to keep him into that 2018-19 season. No. If he was so upset to be there, and Tom Thibodeau was shaking his hands, he was all excited when Jimmy Butler was cooking the third stringers, or was with the third stringers cooking the starters. He, in a way, it felt like kind of liked that, and he wanted to see it work. He waited way too long. He sat on his hands. The Wolves did, and they settled for a package that was really bad with the caliber of player Butler was. So
really bad.
Just a horrible situation overall. I totally get, though, when he was on the court, certainly was one of the best in Wolves history. So to round out the list, like you mentioned, we both got this guy. It's Anthony Edwards.
Before we do that, before we go to the king, I just want to say with the Jimmy Butler, like just talking about our list a little bit, to make the pure distinction for everybody. Charlie and I hit the microphone. Charlie and I, we've started watching basketball a little different times, and you can kind of tell like Charlie's list is very much about like franchise cultural significance.
That's a good way to put it.
Whereas mine is like stale and just here are the best players I've literally ever seen.
No, dude, that's
had no color to it.
So, yeah, and that's important. I think that's like, this is maybe a little too deep, but like that's probably the lens through which I see like basketball and stuff. You might say I'm like still pretty naive and I'm a romantic about certain things, and that's what I like to write about, and I love the storylines and all that.
That's why you're a great writer, because
I appreciate you saying that.
Like you're a great writer because you do see the significance beyond the basketball court, and I think that there's a great mix between our lists, because I just gave like my list. I saw these players play, and you saw them too. But you also put the flavor into it, which I think makes it a really good mix that we did this show together.
Yeah, well, yours, I mean, it's important skill to have. I mean, to be able to take out the emotion side of things is, you know, yeah, I like your list looking at it. I mean, it's like you said, it's funny how we both have, there's a lot of different names on these lists, but they both look, you know, I mean, they're obviously, there's no right or wrong, but so, yeah, my number one.
There's a place for both. There's a place. Yep. Like I think people misconstrued this all the time, saying that like it's bad to have like flavor and emotion in like rankings. But I think it's complete nonsense. This is basketball. This isn't politics. Like your list is great, and I think the fact that it's kind of like yin and yang, right? Like it's a good mix for a show.
Yeah. So number one, Anthony Edwards. I did have you're gonna kill me for this. I did have the thought of potentially putting Cat over Ant. Short thought. Again, I'm a Cat Bobo. Just because of the how long Cat was here, nearly a decade, and he was consistently, you know, put up good numbers. But then I was like, it was a fleeting thought. Ant's entering his 6th year in the NBA. 6th year. That's still just like insane to me. And there's no question who's been the best player in both of our lifetimes. You know, I think he's. It's rare that you stumble on a guy like Ant, and we've kind of come to that conclusion even further throughout this ranking. It didn't happen with Cat. It didn't happen with Andrew, but it's happening with Ant, and he's the future of this team. He's the face of this team. He's a face of the league. You know, I don't know if there's ever going to be one face of the league, but he's a face, and I don't think it's outlandish to say that all the commercials and how big of a name he is. For as long as he's on the team, they're going to try to win a championship. For as long as he's in the NBA, the team he's on will try to win a championship. It's rare to have a player that has that type of gravity, and the Wolves are lucky to have him. They're lucky to get him when they did. Again, we could go back and like, what if they drafted Cat in 2020? Like, what would that look like? It was a good time for Ant to come on and really put his mark on a franchise that he will be associated with for the rest of his career.
And there's no doubt Anthony Edwards is the greatest player in franchise history. And like you mentioned, you only get a few cracks at a player who can be a face of the league in any franchise's existence. I mean, look at the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, it took 50 years to go from Kareem to Giannis, and we'll see if Anthony Edwards can become Kareem or Giannis, but it's very clear that Anthony Edwards is going to be one of the 5 names everybody's going to be talking about, right? Like 10 years ago, it's LeBron, it's Steph, it's KD, it's Harden, it's Kawhi, right? Anthony Edwards is going to be that modern equivalent to that group at the minimum, in my opinion. And that's a rare opportunity. And he's brought in not only just an incredible player who has so much room to improve. He's already a top 10 player. He could end up being the best player at some point. But also, he's brought in a swagger, a confidence, an intrigue. He's a Timberwolves, top 15 in Timberwolves or NBA jersey sales, which is not an easy feat historically. Kids want to be like him. Kids want to wear his shoes. That's a dynamic we haven't really had since Kevin Garnett, and I think he's actually going to be an even more marketable player than Kevin Garnett was. Yeah. So he provides just such an amazing dynamic. He's an incredible player, and he's an interesting young player because he's a great individual player, and he also provides, I think, a maturity and emotional intelligence of how to lead a team, which nobody expected from him when he was a draft prospect, when that was the biggest question with him. But he's proven that that question was probably the most off any scout has been on about when evaluating a number one pick in recent NBA history. He's been everything and more that Minnesota could have ever expected from him. And he has so much room to grow. And I can see him taking an all NBA first team leap this year. He's an incredible player.
Yeah, and the thing with it's the authenticity that he has with the leadership qualities. He's himself. He always is himself, for better or for worse. And like when he calls out the team for being soft after that loss right before Thanksgiving, that was a turning point. And to call a team out like that, like, sometimes people say, coaches, they don't talk to the media, they talk through the media, right? And that could have been, probably wasn't even what he was intending to do, because it's just Ants just saying what he wants. When he does that, he's going to get fined. Obviously that's part of the ramifications, but he was talking through the media to his team, and he was calling them, publicly, and they were able to right the ship. And it all comes from just an authentic place of this is just who he is. And he, like you mentioned, he has that it factor, and it's not something he really has to work for. It's something that Wiggins didn't have. And it's something that is going to really carry the Wolves for as long as he wants to be here, which is hopefully the rest of his career.
What you said is literally my favorite word in the English language. And not to get too philosophical on this show, but authenticity is such an amazing, it's such a powerful word. And I think it dominoes into many other great traits. And one trait that you really highlighted on was accountability. And that is a skill that very few people in their 50s have. Accountability is hard because it puts yourself in a position to be vulnerable in front of everybody. And that's hard to be in. And what makes him special and why this culture is moving to where it is, he's not afraid to look stupid. He's not afraid to take the stupid shot. He's not afraid to do the stupid thing. He's not afraid of being the face of the team. And that's a strength we haven't seen since Kevin Garnett. And it is why players who are older than him say he's next. It's why players younger than him want to be like him. It's why people like Terrence Shannon Jr., who is older than Anthony Edwards, talks about Anthony Edwards like a big brother. It's not just about an age thing. It's a presence he provides that very few players in the NBA have. Like, I would argue when you look at young players, like Wemby has it. I think Shea has it a little bit. I think Anthony Edwards has it. And outside of those three, we're still figuring out who has it. But he's one of those young players who does. And even Wemby is not nearly as proven as Anthony Edwards in that yet. I just believe he has it. So Minnesota being in this position where sometimes it feels like when you watch basketball for 20 years and you're getting punched in the face and you keep saying, I'm going to come again and again and watch it. And I hope that doesn't get on some TikTok memes. But it is something that is really special. And I think he's fantastic. I think he's fantastic. Yeah. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah. Well, you got philosophical, and then that happened.
Yeah, continue.
Are you going to cut like this part out?
No, I'm not cutting that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So Anthony Edwards, hell of a player. Wolves are in a good spot because of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's just, I think one thing is be really interesting to see because he's year 6 on this team. And we've seen it, like Karl-Anthony Towns is the longest tenured number 1 overall pick in Minnesota since Tim Duncan. Number 1 picks don't last long on teams, unfortunately. So how does he respond and just push forward? I think, can Minnesota keep positioning him to want to be in Minnesota? Because if he can and he spends 5-10 more years here, I think he will end up being the best player in a Timberwolves uniform ever. And that is with full respect to Kevin Garnett with how great he was. And if anybody who's older than me wants to call me naive and stupid and say, I didn't watch peak Kevin Garnett, you are absolutely right. Comment that right now. So I just think he has that type of potential.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too, like just the contrasting ownership and top people compared to when Garnett was here and Edwards was here, or Edwards is here. It's like they've made no indication that they're not going to do everything in their power, meaning Alex Rodriguez, Mark Lowry, Tim Conley, to make a contender around Edwards for as long as he wants to be here. And that's also too where it's, everyone, the comparison is the thief of all joy. And when they compare Ant to MJ, no one likes that. He doesn't like it. But the old school qualities that he has, one of those is the fact that he just seems incredibly loyal, just naturally. Like he's like, this is my team. This is the team that drafted me. This is the team I want to. I've got brothers on this team, Jay and Wright, who are like a family to me. I want to lead them. I want to do it with them, And when he calls the team out publicly, it's not because he's, it's not like you have to worry about, Ant's a little upset. Like, what does this mean for his future with the team? And it's like, no, he knows there's an issue. He wants to address it. He knows what needs to happen to address it, and he's willing to be coached hard to have that be addressed. And that's just a quality I feel like, maybe I'm incorrect in this. It's just players. Butler's maybe an example, maybe not, of just, it's once it gets tough, it's like, hey, we're in a league where the players really control a lot. And that's good. Players should have more control than they have historically. But Ant is a guy that's just like, hey, I want to hoop. I want to do it in Minnesota. I want to bring a championship with my teammates to this city. And it's rare air to have a player like that.
Butler was an example of when things get tough, ego gets in the way. You can be tough when it's on your terms, but when it isn't on your terms, that's when you can really, to continue getting philosophical, that's when you can really evaluate who has the real leadership intangibles. And Greg Popovich with Tim Duncan would say, I can coach Tim Duncan harder than any player on the team. And that allows other players to be coached. And that dynamic Minnesota has with Chris Finch and Anthony Edwards. And I don't think there's many young players who's just a better fit for an organization like that. Who knows what it would have looked like if Anthony Edwards ended up on the Detroit Pistons and it takes 4 years to have a pulse. Nobody knows. He did end up in a very good situation, which people didn't expect. And Minnesota deserves credit for aligning these opportunities for him to grow and to win and to develop these characters, because a lot of it comes from Patrick Beverley being in the room, Ricky Rubio being in the room, Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert. He's always had a voice. So Minnesota deserves credit for really helping that blossom, but it still has to be in you for it to really come out. And Anthony Edwards has it.
100%. 100%.
And Charlie, this is a great show.
I had a blast, man. I can't thank you enough for having me on.
It was a blast. And Charlie, he does incredible writing. Follow him all over social media. He does incredible work, and he's a great writer. And I think, like I said in the beginning of the show, he is going to be in the wave of the Timberwolves, like future NBA writers at a professional level. And a lot of people I've had on the show, I can say that for. And I'm grateful to have all the guests I've had on the show so far. But like I said, Charlie, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, man. This has been great.
Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. We will see you soon. The NBA training camp is looming. It's coming soon. So expect so much more content. Thank you all so much. This is Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom.